Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this edition of Grassroots Racing Show.
Welcome to the Grassroots Racing Show. I'm your co-host Doug Thompson with my brother Roger Thompson, co-host, and we have special guest Bob Lawrence. If you tuned in last week, you had the opportunity to meet Bob and to take a look at his website, because Bob is a racing historian, obviously from the state of Kansas, but you cover a lot of Kansas racers racing outside of the area. And Bob, would you give the viewers your website so they can follow along?
It's kansasracinghistory.com.
And kansasracinghistory.com has probably how many pages on that website?
There's more than 3,000 if you really want to take the time to go look at all of them.
And how many years have you been working to develop that?
About 1998 when I started that, somewhere along in there.
Quite a while.
Yes.
And you maintain it?
Yes, I'm it. I started it, I put it together, and I maintain it.
If somebody wants to submit something to you that they think may have some interest for Kansas racing history, how do they go about that?
Right at that web page where you're talking about, there's a click here button that has my email
Contact
address.
Information?
That's it.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And you can catch me that way, or my email is sprintguy@cox.net. And you're of course welcome to use that and get in touch with me.
All right, fantastic. Now, if we think back about racing, you think back about the turn of the century, shortly thereafter, turn of 1900 century, and you talk about some of those people from there. You think of names that were probably world known, or at least in the States, like Barney Oldfield. Barney ever come into Kansas?
Mario Andretti?
Yeah. No, not Andretti. Barney.
Barney Oldfield.
Yeah.
Barney Oldfield. My apology.
No.
Barney Oldfield did race here. Raced at the Kansas State Fairgrounds in Hutchinson in 1912. He owned all the cars, so he pretty well had it made, but he was good at that time too. But he drove the best car and he won the race.
He had a name for his car. What was it, Killer or something? Killer Machine or something? Maybe that was one of the promos that they did with it.
That I'm not aware of. That particular car that he drove at the Kansas State Fairgrounds and won the race in was sponsored by Firestone Tire and Rubber, and it said Firestone. It didn't even have a number on the car. It was Firestone. It was painted on the side so big. So it was a Firestone car. I forgot the brand right now. He had several cars there that day, and one was a Christie, but I can't remember if that's the one he won in.
I don't remember him, but I remember reading it that that he drove a Christie, and he had one that was named Killer Machine, and it was like a $25,000 car. Now, of course, that's some promo that was put together, probably a promoter put it together. And it could be true.
I don't know.
Yeah, it could be.
I'm not aware.
Certainly, he had figured out the marketing, how to make this work, because Firestone would have been the tire manufacturer in that time.
That's correct. He was very much into public relations, publicity. He knew how to sell his product, and so yes, of course, that's one of the things that made him so successful.
Who are some of the other famous people that would have raced in Kansas, famous racers that went on to do something at a national level?
Oh boy, at a national level. One I like to tell about is Glenn Breed, and a lot of people wonder who Glenn Breed is, but he was born in Michigan and raced on the Buick factory racing team starting in 1905. In fact, his very first car race was in Michigan, and one of the other drivers entered that day was Barney Oldfield. Now, they didn't race in any of the same races. They raced in different races, but at any rate, that started in 1905. He quit the Buick team in 1909, moved to St. Louis, and then moved west to Kansas. And he raced all over the state of Kansas, first in Buicks, but they were Buicks he owned. He wasn't racing for the big racing team anymore. And then in 1916, Hudson came out with a Super 6, and that was the car to have at that time for dirt track racing. And so he got a Super 6 and switched from Buick to Hudson, never to go back. And he ran Hudson Super 6s after that. And then after World War I, he moved to Texas and finished his career down there. He's buried just a few feet from where he was born, back up in Michigan.
Oh, my goodness. There are some other, of course, famous racers from Kansas, like Johnny Rutherford.
Rutherford's from Coffeyville. And there are a lot of people that have raced in the Indianapolis 500. I knew personally A.J. Shepard. I used to be his mail carrier.
Really?
And he raced in the 1961 Indianapolis 500. And it's very interesting to listen to him talk about it. Once you could get him to loosen up to talk about it, it was a very interesting man, very interesting career getting to Indy. But he lived there in Wichita, and I retired from it now, but I was a mail carrier. And there were many others. Right now, my mind's going blank.
We're going to talk to some more after we come back from break. Time for us to cut away, take a break. You're watching the Grassroots Racing Show with our special guest, Bob Lawrence.
You're watching the Grassroots Racing Show.
Welcome back to the Grassroots Racing Show. We are visiting with Kansas racing historian Bob Lawrence. And Bob, we were talking about some of the famous racers from that's raced in Kansas or from Kansas, kind of a combination. You know, when we talk about the Indy 500, we left out one that is out of Beloit, Roger Ward.
Roger, and of course he did well, as did Joey Chitwood, who was from Severy, Kansas. And in fact, he drove his first race here in Kansas at Winfield in 1933. And he was a chief mechanic on a car, and he didn't feel the driver was doing a very good job, so he pitched the driver. And he got in the car himself and finished second in the feature, and the car owner decided, well, we got a driver now, we just need a crew chief. And so that's how Joey Chitwood got started driving.
And then somewhere in there he kind of ended the racing career but picked up the Daredevil.
The Daredevil, but that was after his Indy career had pretty well gone over as he was older. And so yes, he did do that. And of course he's actually, I think, better known for his thrill driving, thrill show driving.
Didn't his son pick it up too? Didn't he have a son that was involved in that?
He has a son named Joey Chitwood Jr., and he works for NASCAR. But other than that, I'm not really familiar with what it is.
He works at the administration in NASCAR?
Right, he's one of the officers of NASCAR.
I did not realize that.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, did you ever see Joey? You ever see the thrill shows?
I never did.
They had one up at the plaza when we were kids.
Yeah, I was thinking that they had it, and you'd see the cars up on the two wheels, and it was amazing. Matter of fact, here at the Auto Racing Museum, we haven't set up the display yet, but we have a Joey Chitwood display, and I think we have, I don't know, he probably had more than one helmet, but we have his helmet and some items that the family has donated here that we're going to be putting up an exhibit.
They used to jump off the ramp and do the T-bone in.
Yeah.
And then the part that I liked is the local drivers. They had a bunch of old cars for them, and they'd have rollover contests.
You're right, I forgot about that.
Remember, they'd run up on two wheels and see who
could get the most rolls, and the audience would count. 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, but I mean, the idea was to land back on your wheels and keep going, and a lot of those guys did a pretty good job
They did a real good job at it.
Yeah.
Another person that had one of those thrill shows that did that was Tom Holden from Waukene, Kansas. And he himself, although had been a long-time racer, he didn't drive in the thrill shows. He owned it, and then his sons were the drivers in the thrill show. And it was from Waukene, and they ran nationwide at the same time Chitwood was.
Did not realize that. I did not know it. Go ahead.
I remember at Wichita one time when we were racing super modifieds, at the intermission they had a guy get out there and get in a box, cardboard box or something, and Harold Leap come flying around there, and he was supposed to, I don't know what happened, but when his car got near the box or something, the box blew up. Was that right?
Yep. The man was a clown, and right now, I mean, a professional clown.
Well, I knew him for a long time, but Harold, I wouldn't describe him as a clown.
No, I mean the man in the box was a clown.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
I got you.
And I can't remember his name, but he was a professional clown, and he was deaf as a post. He could not hear anything at all. And so
probably from the explosion.
From the explosions, exactly, over the years. And so he had to know when the car was going by because he couldn't hear it.
Feel the ground shake or something. Maybe. Well, that was the idea of it, is he was to be in the box and then they explode the box when he goes by?
Explode the box as the car would go by.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's something. Trick.
Yeah. I actually saw him do that one time when I was much smaller.
Was it more thrilling than it sounds?
I like car races.
Yeah. Okay.
And,
well, good for that guy.
I don't know why they chose Harold Leap to drive the car around there.
Generally, they used for somebody who would volunteer to do it. They were just looking for volunteers. I can't speak for Harold in particular.
Well, he'd been in the Army. He would never have volunteered.
No, he would have known better than to put your hand up in the air if you've been in the Army.
That
you'd be on KP, guard duty, everything.
Too late, or he could have run over the box, and then, I mean, anything could have happened.
Yeah, it could have been disastrous. Well, I'm glad it wasn't. So we were talking about some other famous racers from Kansas that went on to do things. You mentioned Jay Woodside when we were on.
Jay Woodside was from Wichita. In fact, actually started out in Kansas City. And Jay was actually, as a teenager, was quite heavy set. And he got a chance to drive race cars, but they said, except you weigh too much. And so he went on a crash diet, lost weight, and never bringed it back again. From then on, he was a trim, muscular young man who drove race cars very well. And he got his very first ride with Red Fortune that was a car owner here in Kansas, and that's where Jay Woodside got started racing cars.
Laverne Nance had a rule that if you can't fit in a small seat, you can't drive my race car.
And he wasn't the only one that had rules like that.
I bet not.
He's the one that also, remember when they started going to the titanium bolts and stuff, he said it's a lot easier to put the driver on a diet than it is the race car.
Actually,
That's right.
we were putting a car together down at Wichita at his shop, and Steve Kinzer came in with this handful of bolts that he'd paid $3,000 for, and Laverne says to him, "Why didn't you just save your $3,000 and quit eating a few hamburgers?" But that was Laverne. I mean, he was right to the point.
And that was with Steve Kinzer?
Yeah,
Of course,
that was Steve Kinzer came in.
Of course, you know, now that we mentioned Laverne, we've got Roger drove the last coilover car that Laverne built, and we have it here in the Auto Racing Museum. But you know, with Laverne, he had we've got an early picture of Sammy Swindell with him running in the World of Outlaw in maybe 80 or 81.
85, 86 when the World of Outlaw
somewhere
started.
along in there, but he won the points title driving Laverne's car.
That's correct.
And so, I mean, and of course, Laverne Nance cars are well known at that time, certainly nationwide. If you had a Nance-built car, you had a very, very good race car.
We've got a list on this little article that was written for Open Wheel that lists all the people that drove for him. And it's a who's who in racing. Remember, there's about 3 columns, and there's some big names in there.
That drove the house car?
That drove for Laverne Nance. You ought to read
he
the
built
article.
thousands of cars. And so, I mean,
know.
there was probably several thousand cars he made, but they certainly went on to win features everywhere throughout the United States. And we've got a lot of those things here. Bob, I know you were looking around last time you were here at the Auto Racing Museum, but we're going to cut away. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to do another segment and visit with you because we're really enjoying this. Thank you. Thanks for watching.
Bet.
Keep watching. We might be filming racing action at your track next. Welcome back to the Grassroots Racing Show. I'm Doug Thompson with my brother co-host Roger Thompson, our special guest Bob Lawrence from Wichita. And Bob, you have a amazing, you're of course the historian for Kansas for auto racing. Your website for those people who are just tuning in.
KansasRacingHistory.com.
You will find over 3,000 pages of information on there, and you can do lots of research. You will enjoy it. When you go to that website and you start viewing it, you will be on there for a long period of time if you have any interest in racing.
I might tell you too, on that front page of the website there is a search engine that will search only my website. You won't be out running around. So if you think, well, I wonder if he's written about somebody from Kansas who raced, you can put their name in that search engine. If they're on my website, they'll come up.
And Bob's philosophy is the same as ours here at the Auto Racing Museum. We believe that there's, if you take the history of auto racing across Kansas, there's a million-piece puzzle. And I tell people lots of times, I said, you know, you come in here and you say, oh, I've only got this much information, and you give it, and I said, everybody gets those pieces put together. We will have a pretty complete history of auto racing in Kansas. And thank you for doing what you're doing, because those items that you have on your website would be lost. Yeah. Absolutely would be lost. And if you need to contact Bob to provide some information, your grandfather raced, or you have interest in it, or you have something from Kansas that you're not sure what it is in the racing field, you'll be able to contact Bob by going to his website. Now, Bob, we were talking before about some of the people from Kansas that went on and did some other things, like Clint Boyer, of course, out of Emporia.
Of course, he's one of the very well-known ones that's still racing with NASCAR. But we also, of course, have Jim Roper from Kansas, who won the very first NASCAR, what is now Sprint Cup, but won that race. He was from here in Kansas, as was the car owner, Millard Clothier. He was here from Kansas as well.
Okay, let's go to that. Let's go to that race, that first race that Jim won. Won it at New Charlotte Speedway,
right.
at Charlotte, North Carolina.
That's correct.
And it was a half-mile track at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so how did Jim come to go down to there to race? Because Kansas to Charlotte's a long ways.
He saw it in a cartoon. He was reading a magazine somewhere, and there was a cartoon that they wrote about this race was coming up in Charlotte. And he said it just struck him, well, that would be a fun thing to do. So he talked to Clothier, who owned the car, and they said, well, yeah, we'll go. And so they actually took 2 cars, they were Lincolns, and took them to Charlotte, and then Jim got his choice of which car he wanted. And then after he did that, Bill France got a driver, local driver, to drive the other one. And the 2 drivers met the day before the races, and they agreed that whatever the winnings would be, they would put it all in one pot, and then the winner would take his share, the car owner would take his share, and the other 2 would split what was left. Well, after Jim Roper won the race and the other driver had dropped out, when it came time to split the pot in half, Roper got upset because he's like, wait a minute, I won the race. You're giving him all the money. That was the agreement, and so that's what they did.
And, well, the other car was doing quite well until it overheated at 7-8 laps to go.
That is correct. He was, in fact, actually he was ahead of Roper.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Of course, Roper in those days had said that, or afterwards, said that he won the race. And he said they had it scored wrong. Did you hear that?
I've heard it. I don't know necessarily if that's true. Again, you can read all about that on my website. It tells the whole story and both sides of the story, so you can decide yourself.
Did you get the chance to visit with Jim?
No, one of my failures, if you will. I knew that Jim was around. Yes, I need to go see him, and he passed away before I got that done, and I feel bad about that. I
have the interview. I have an interview with Jim of about a 5-6 hour interview that went to Texas and got it, and he talked about the race and of course Jim's position. Jim Roper we're talking about, that was in earlier days, Roger, Jim was a flagman, or maybe Jim's later days, he was a flagman at Wichita, wasn't he?
81 Speedway, yeah, for many years.
And most people had no clue that he had won the first NASCAR race because, of course, NASCAR wasn't a big deal yet. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until later that certainly at 1994, at North Wilkesboro, they were trying to find out who the first winner of the race was. And it turned out to be Jim Roper. We happened to be racing at North Wilkesboro that day. I got to meet Jim and then met him, either I'd met him before or afterwards up at Belleville. He was consistently the Grand Marshal. Mm-hmm. You know, very interesting fella.
He was.
And, he's just an interesting person. I had a lot of good conversations with him.
He started out racing in Newton in a jalopy stock car. The interesting thing about that Newton track is it was the world's first figure-8 track. And it only lasted about 5 years, and of the 5 years it operated, only one was a figure-8. They decided it was a half-mile figure-8 track, which won't work. And they didn't take them but a year to figure that out, and they went to running it as an oval track. But that's where Jim Roper got started.
That's where he started?
Mm-hmm.
And do you have any knowledge about when he became flagman later, kind of gave up the racing?
I know that he flagged at Winfield in 1958. Other than that, I can't really give you dates and places and all. It was after his racing days, although he did make starts as late as 1961, but he wasn't a serious racer.
Yeah.
That late.
Yeah, and a lot of others that have raced in Kansas. What about some of those that went on to race in NASCAR that came up here to run, like David Pearson, Petty, any of those people? Did they come up to Hutch or anything?
Well, Pearson and Petty in particular did not. The Woods brothers did. And NASCAR had a convertible series that raced in the 50s. They raced a lot of 55, 56 Chevrolets, but they were convertibles. And there were a number of people, well-known names, that raced in that convertible series back in the 50s that then later on were known for their being connected with NASCAR later on, and that raced in that particular race. But as far as like say Pearson and Petty, I don't recall them ever being in Kansas.
Yeah, I'd heard rumors that David Pearson had come up and had ran Hutchison, but that may have just been a rumor.
I think I can tell you for sure Hutchison I happen to know about, and he did not.
Did not do it.
Okay. They brought Bobby Isaac's car up one time, but Bobby Isaac wasn't in it, the Nord Christoph car, and ran it at Hutch.
Hope you've enjoyed watching the Grassroots Racing Show with special guest Bob Lawrence. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time on the Grassroots Racing Show. There is exciting racing action every week on Grassroots Racing Show Night at the Track. You don't want to miss a single episode. If you miss any of the shows, be sure to look us up on Facebook or at grassrootsracing.org.